So this is Kal Kat, the Kal Katster, and this is a review of Strange New Worlds, Episode 1, Strange New Worlds. Well, not very original for title. There was a Strange New Worlds book contest, which I entered in the late 90s. One of my stories was called Fearful Symmetry. I rewrote the Fearful Symmetry story as a Borg instead of the Dominion and the Dominion's people. It made the Fearful Symmetry to be them instead of the Shapeshifters. I didn't win. But that story idea ended up in a pocketbook story called Fearful Symmetry, written by someone else. So I wish they made it more about the Cardassians and the Dominion. So they made it back into the other story, which is interesting. The original story was the DS9 episode, Fearful Symmetry, which became the ship. And then we have, heavily rewritten at that point, to the point that they didn't need to pay. This unsolicited fan that or screen. So then we have the Arbiter, which was based on a Next Generation one called Differences. It was rewritten, Differences. And now we have Strange New Worlds, which is the Arbiter. This episode is, I didn't get any say in this one either. They didn't quite get the message right either, but they had the speech. The Janeway and Tuvok's speech, it's in there. So originally the Arbiter was about these two warring factions that develop warp drive that basically the bomb. They want to blow each other up, and the Starfleet people go down there to try and arbitrate to make sure they don't blow each other up. The Prime Directive applies there and all that. And it's kind of the same plot. This particular episode, Strange New Worlds, of course, because of that, I get to have Strange Worlds, the Star Trek fan film, and I get to do fan films about Star Trek that are parodies, and this Starship locations and all that other stuff. Because Kiva Goldsman borrowed the idea. That spec script. Not knowing where he officially got it, but they've been borrowing from our stuff for 30 years, so why not again? So at least it really, really seems like it. I'm not the first person to think of that kind of a story, though. I mean, many Star Trek episodes were about that. Let's just say that, too. But yes, my fan film can exist because this other one exists. So, they're okay with it. They're like, oh, he can do what he likes. Yeah, it's fine. Well, okay. So I have Starship Location Strange Worlds, and they have Strange New Worlds. So here we have Strange New Worlds. Opening with Ensign Mount, who is an older gentleman actor who sort of a glamour, rugged-looking guy. Not as cute as Booker, mind you, but glamorous looking. So he's on the planet. He's apparently been shagging number one. His number one is his number one, and she's called off on a space mission. It's not clear how many months occurred between the two. She goes to a planet where they trap her crew, apparently, on this planet. They're having a civil war unrest. They've developed warp drive, or they developed warp, but not warp drive. So they have antimatter bombs, basically. The Archer is the ship in orbit. The spoilery review, the Captain Admiral April at this point is played by a black dude. That's fine in this universe. But there are some people that are butthurt that are like, no, it has to be this other guy. Well, so Pike looks like April at this point, so so they were just mixing this. Yeah, and there's we have a new cast and crew. We have a Nurse Chapel who's studying to be a nurse, kind of like the I know it's like the original, but it's not quite. She was also played by Michelle in original by Michelle Roddenberry. She played Chapel and Number One. And later on, she played Mrs. Deanna Troy, Lieutenant Troy. But in this one, it's someone else, obviously, and sort of younger. The whole crew is younger people. It appears to take place in 2259, shortly after the events of Discovery, but they sort of fudge that the other story where Pike gets injured is years down the road, about a decade down the road or something. It's not in the other story because they screwed up the timeline already. And the only reason they did the cage, the Menagerie like that, was that because Jeffrey Hunter wasn't available to be in the Menagerie. Continuity, that's the reason. To see that in 1964, they filmed the episode and it said it's 300 years later, it's 2364. So they're all, well, we couldn't get Jeffrey Hunter to come back, so we'll just get this other actor and we'll put a radiation burns on him and make him look scarred and messed up. That's the only reason they did that, because they couldn't get Jeffrey Hunter. That makes it canon.
There's a lot of crap on here. Don't step in it.
No. So that makes it. So that's the only reason the original Star Trek had Jeffrey Hunter, and the other thing was they just didn't have him available. The Menagerie makes it a two-parter to connect it to the original footage, the cage with Pike, and then they make it 11 years later because Spock happens to say it's 11 years later. So continuity-wise, those events where them getting injured happened at some point in the 2260s, the late 2250s, early 2260s, because they later established that the original series was 2264 to 2269. That Discovery is supposed to be 10 years earlier, but it ends up not being. Screws up the timeline. Multiverse, it's a different timeline. This version of Pike and the Enterprise is a different timeline where events are kind of skewed. Not as badly as they were in the J.J. Abrams Trek movies, where they made Kirk like an ensign and now he's a captain. That should have happened in 20. He should have been on the Farragut and all that stuff. They don't do that, but yeah, they weren't thinking. They were just thinking, oh, when do we want to do a Pike series? But it's 10 years down the line. It's 10 years later. But that's not the timeline. That's not the way it works, because there's some of it works and some of it doesn't, because they did. I'm not sure if they're using the Toronto sets or some other sets, but they're kind of using some of that wraparound screen thing, but only briefly. They have to see where they're filming this. I didn't look up that, but yeah, okay. So that there was a continuity that was written as of basically Star Trek II. Star Trek II established, okay, this movie is set in the year 2282 or 83, basically 2282 or 83. It's somewhere around there. So that it can be 16 years earlier than he encounters Khan in 2267. Then they went back and they said, okay, so the original 5-year mission was 2264 to 2269. Star Trek: The Motion Picture was then 2270 or 71, roughly around in there, around Christmas time, and the Next Generation is 2364 to 2369, 2370, 71 roughly, 100 years later. But it's 78 years since the original series in the Next Generation. So that means the original series ended in 2296, roughly. Like the end of Star Trek 6, basically. So they had all that continuity and they could have looked that up. They said, okay, this is where the timeline fits. They could have said, okay, we need to set Discovery in 2252 in order for the timeline to work. Yeah, so it's 2252, 2251, 52, somewhere around there. We can't go any higher than that because Pike gets in the space accident within a year of 2259, so it doesn't work. So it's got to be like 2252. But they let Fuller go. He knew, but they let him go, so they didn't know. They tried to fix it. But they did listen to the fans a little bit, and they did say, okay, the ship has to look more like the Enterprise. And they listened to the Trek Guards guys. The ship looked more like Trek Guards ship. But it doesn't quite match with Discovery because it's a completely... The Kiva Goldsman timeline is different than the Abrams timeline. And it's different than the Prime timeline. They should have said that to begin with. It's different. All that continuity leads us to this story where Pike's first officer, number one, Una, goes out and goes to this planet where they trap her on the Civil War planet, and they got to go. And Next Generation's done a few episodes like that too, but yeah, they've what the Arbiter was originally on Voyager was supposed to be a Tuvok episode where Tuvok figures things out because he's Tuvok, he's cool and collective, and he's Vulcan. Makes sense that he would work things out. He and Janeway would use their skills in the Delta Quadrant to arbitrate the mission and get the bomb and shut it off. And yeah, so that's what happens. It was rewritten as a episode of the Space Vanguards or Starcrackers. It was called Starcrackers. It became Space Vanguard series. So it was rewritten as an episode, a few chapters of that. As was Fearful Symmetry was rewritten into the space Canary Space series, and another one, Distant Destinies. So the other stories have been rewritten into other things. So that's why you don't get. That's why silly Starship Location Strange Worlds doesn't do those two episodes because they've been done like 3 or 4 times. We did our own thing. Well, kind of did our own thing. I mean, the Tribble story was David Gerald script that we rewrote as a next gen 2400s story. But it was David Gerald who wrote for Star Trek. He wrote Tribbles. I was at a convention in 2017 or so, and he handed me a script, and he knew about people doing fan films. They knew I did fan film. So, here, do my thing as a fan film. I mean, Star Trek Continues did it. So. Okay. New Voyages did it. So, okay. I'll do one. And I did. But with action figures. I changed things around and updated it to the teenage period. But I did pay homage to the story 78 years earlier with the Enterprise B crashed on the planet. The Ventura B. So I did pay homage to it. I did say that, that actually happened back then, and it's happening again. The planet. Yeah, so the new crew on the Pike's Enterprise should be on their way out to usher in Kirk. If it's 2259, 2260, Kirk is but 5 years away, and so there is a Kirk. I won't give it away, and he's not going to be like the captain right away because that doesn't make sense. The other Kirk is going to appear. I hear that he's going to appear, and he's going to be Lieutenant Kirk from probably the Farragut. So they are going to do that. So Trek Corps. I was mentioning the Farragut and the other ship and the other thing. I was giving you guys hints that that's going to happen. So it's not the next movie, but yeah. They do reference the Second Civil War. And they reference World War III and the Eugenics War, and they reference the Con Girl. Apparently, in this timeline, the Con ship was captured by the Gorn. I don't know how the Gorn got a hold of it. They tortured all of them, leaving one behind. So she's yeah. There's a little bit of elements of the Orville in here as well. The captain, security officer, lady, strong kind of thing. Yeah, they're kind of cribbing from the Orville. Well, they sort of did that with Murph from the other one. It was also dedicated to somebody that died on the set, but it didn't say who that was. So I'm not sure why it was. Somebody died during the making of it, so they dedicated it. Similar to a old Transformers Mush story, somebody usually dies during the. Somebody famous usually dies, and we do a little thing at the end. Usually, it's a coincidence. Nobody on the set dies, but it's like, okay, in this case, somebody on the set apparently died. But yeah, the transporters used a little too much. I liked how they showed the sick bay. How they like alter them to go down to the planet. Brief genetic alterations. It kind of doesn't make sense. In the original Trek, it was just like makeup they put on them so they wouldn't recognize their physiology. That was a little odd. Next Gen kind of did it too when they went down to a planet for First Contact. So they do a First Contact thing and then they call it the Prime Directive for the first time, which was fun. There were some fun moments. It's definitely off to a good start, even though it's continuity-wise, it should have already happened 5 years earlier. But yeah. So, but I'm chalking it up to the Akiva Goldsman and the other lady from Pine Hill Timeline. Pine Hill, yep, that again. Being an Evergreen in San Jose State. There's a San Jose State guy in there. Being another timeline that it's not. We're not actually in the Prime timeline. We're in a slightly other timeline that happens to have similar events unfolding that aren't quite the Prime timeline. Like, yeah, because they can't be. Because, yeah, wouldn't the Abrams timeline people be now meeting V'ger? Because it's been like 20. It's like, yeah, right after the original 5-year mission, and they'd be meeting V'ger. And this one, they'd be meeting an early version of V'ger. But yeah, fairly soon. Well, not fairly soon, but in a decade. So Pike is already in another universe. They do address that. They keep saying he's seen his death and he's seen this other thing happen on Borath and whatever. Mentioned the sister. That was never mentioned in the original Shrek. So the timeline is already changed by the appearance of Burnham. It's already altered. Cybok is Burnham or something. Or Cybok never existed or something. We get to see T'Pring, though. Spock. We get to see other, like, stuff that reminds us of things like a mock time in the future, in a future episode. Yeah, so they did the Arbiter, but they didn't do it right. We'll say that. Most of the Arbiter episode from the Voyager script was a lot of talking, discussion, and stuff. Not a lot of running around with phasers and disguising themselves and attacking bombs and whatever. It wasn't an action episode. The DS9 one was an action episode, trying to find out where the female Vorta was and stop her. Whatever. That does sound familiar, doesn't it? Sounds like the ship. Well, there's a reason it sounds like that. There's a reason it sounds like that. Yeah. So uncredited original writer of the ship. And then it was rewritten by 3 or 4 other people. So yeah, we have because I was in college back then. It's like they weren't gonna give a college kid in what he's doing. They're not gonna give him anything. 30 years ago, no, they're not gonna give him credit for that. Oh, just forget that Harlan Ellison was in his 20s when he wrote City on the Edge of Forever. But that's beside the point. Which they tribbed his stuff at Terminator and Terminator 2. So. Harlan Ellison. The late Harlan Ellison. No relation. Look up Memory Alpha. Ew. Apparently have a cousin on the original Star Trek who died a long time ago. But there's a cousin. And, Brown's knee. Yeah. Can look it up. There's the Brown. There is one. The original Star Trek. But yeah. Oh. And kissed Spock. She kissed Spock. Claim to fame for that lady. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, Elizabeth Brown, I think was her name. Yeah. So we have we have the Strange New Worlds. The Arbiter was more accurate. That was never produced as an official story, although some Voyager stuff later adapted parts of it. The Doctor, Tenor Taylor Doctor Spy, the one with the Kremlin vessel, kinda. Some of the other ones, a little bit of that one where the Voyager was thought to be evil and was on the planet, and they were like the other version of Voyager, and they had misrepresented the future for the Doctor's hollow emitter. A little bit of that, kind of. A little bit of Friendship 1, kind of. The idea that the first contact went bad. That kind of idea. Yeah, so that's what this one was too. So they were just going back to those episodes and going, all right, well, we'll just copy some Voyager episodes. Next week, we get to go to on the show, we get to go to a planet where there's a comet empire kind of thing going on. Sort of. Well, that's Starblazer, so that's not mine at all. I didn't do that. But yeah, that's something else. The two spec scripts that I'm referring to were from a writing contest from the 1990s, so trying to do anything now with them, you'll be rejected because they say that we won't accept any unsolicited fan submissions. In the 1990s, between roughly 1995 and 2001, there was a writing contest where they accepted some scripts to the shows back then. They don't do that anymore, so yeah. But they did at one point, and apparently other people thought they still did in 2016 when some fan, Michael Gamelt, had a website that sounded similar to one of theirs. Star Trek Beyond became Star Trek Uncharted, fan film, like Gamelt. They have since referenced his stuff, as they've also referenced mine, because we're super fans, you see. And they've referenced the stuff, and they're all, oh yeah, we got to reference, some of that stuff in our new things. Oh yeah, without paying us, of course. Yes, unlike they can't pay us because we're not solicited. We're not SAG. We're not Screen Actors Guild or WGA, so they can't pay us. WGA is the Writers Guild of America, and SAG is the Screen Actors Guild. We're neither of those. So yeah, I've known people that were, but not currently. So, I know somebody on the set of Star Trek Online, but some of the other stuff. I thought that they did. Yeah. I thought that they did the Strange New Worlds in a different set than the Canadian one, but maybe they didn't. I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know where this would fit in the universe because he's already been injured in the other universe. So they keep referencing it, but that doesn't fix the timeline continuity problems. So yeah, there's that. Yeah. Ooh, how did the Gorn get a hold of the Khan ship? Yeah, well, the original Star Trek was they didn't know. They even kind of did this with Next Generation. There was an episode where they found the neutral zone, where they find this floating ship that had no engines. It had to have been from Earth and still in the solar system, because how did it get out into deep space where they found it? And there was a frozen people on that one too. So it's like, okay, yeah, the Khan ship built with 1990s eugenics wars technology wouldn't be able to get very far, and it would just be like right outside the solar system somewhere. 300 years later, it would just be floating outside the solar system. It wouldn't make it to another solar system at all. Not with no warp drive. How do I make it to Gorn space? It doesn't make any sense either. But here they are copying the Gods and Men series, another super fan series, and they're copying a little bit of the sequel, Renegades, and she's the girl from Renegades. So in this case, they're basically cribbing Renegades, which is, Oh, yeah, some of the actors were on that. Jay Hetzer Edgar was on there. A bunch of people were on there. Walter Koenig got to be on there, so they're cribbing from that too. So she's literally another fan character that's been inserted into the narrative. Okay. Yeah, so that's where she comes from. She's literally the character from Renegades. The con girl. She's the character from Renegades. So, yeah. So yeah, we have another sort of mishmash because the writers of this show just go through all the fan blogs and just borrow stuff randomly, which is fine. It makes us more famous. I'm okay with it. But yeah, that's where they got it. Anyway, so Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds. Yeah. Episode 1.